When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadavji, your podcast host, a practicing social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 74. She found her mother's dead body and began the emotional turmoil. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our courageous and daring guest, Paige Logan. Paige is an accomplished academic completing both the Honors Fast Track Social Service Worker program and the Addictions and Mental Health program at Fanshawe College. In addition to holding an Honors Bachelor of Arts degree, double majoring in kinesiology and psychology from University of Western Ontario. Paige's educational background, combined with her own personal wellness journey, led her to a singular focus: to help people. With this focus, Paige has had the opportunity to connect with many different marginalized people and populations within the community. Paige coordinates between many different community organizations to establish care and services to best meet the needs of marginalized populations while also supporting and educating staff. In her spare time, Paige volunteers to deliver basic need items to people experiencing homelessness, as well as coaching youth skating. Throughout her journey of personal wellness, Paige has developed a wealth of empathy that has allowed her to connect with people in an impactful way. Paige assists people to realize their goals, dreams, and passions while reminding herself of her own. Well, hello, Paige. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Hello, Salima. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's absolutely my pleasure, Paige. And in fact, it is really exciting to have you as a guest on the show today. And your willingness to be here today to tell your story means so much.
It's an absolute honor to be here. I am very excited for today.
This is so great. Honestly, it's really a blessing and a true honor to encounter guests like yourself who really allow me to tap into their vulnerabilities and draw on their strength and insight and inspiration, and that it's shared into this space that we've created. So I really believe that it's important we take a stance together to help break barriers of mental stigma.
I absolutely agree.
Amazing. And so, Paige, in case you're still wondering, you might be, this podcast, it's all about bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And we know that no matter the story, there is impact on one's own mental health in some way, which tends to remain tucked away. And so this platform serves in a way to break the barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. And my hopeful mission for both of us today is really to be able to encourage people to share and tell what individuals typically have reservations to express. So you get vulnerable and you tap into your story, and that empowers someone else to perhaps come forward and do the same. And through this process, I continue to bring forward a trend, and it's called the mental beauty rethink. Paige, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear this phrase, the mental beauty rethink?
When I first hear that, I think about how beauty itself is so subjective. They say it's in the eyes of the beholder. So to me, it means that beauty is almost defined by like each individual. And when I think of that from like a mental health perspective, I think of it as kind of all encompassing. Like mental beauty consists of all things of our own psyche. And when I think of that rethink piece, it kind of relates to, at least for me, mental wellness, and how mental wellness sounds more like something that is meant to be achieved, whereas mental beauty is something that's almost innate and something that we all have within us. And while it's still something that we can work on, like working on ourselves, we're evolving and we're changing and we're working on our own mental beauty. I think mental wellness almost seems more like I said, something you have to achieve. So I really love this idea of taking that concept and spinning it around where it almost feels like something that we all can experience and we all do experience because it's all just within us already. Like I said, very innately.
You've said it so well. And there's this extra couple spins that you've added to the message. And I love it because it's so important to really get an understanding of what sparks for people when they hear this phrase. But you're right. Beauty is so subjective. The individual experience is so different for each person. When I thought about mental beauty, it actually came from a place where I was looking at how people differentiate so much physical health and mental health, and sometimes they are seen and treated in silos. But I think that one is linked with the other. And the beauty, yes, the beauty piece, yeah, it's all very subjective. And my intention was to allow a space to accept whatever is occurring, being happening,
Right.
and that it's all okay. That was really nice to hear how you put it. And then you added an extra spin to talk about the rethink and the wellness and the idea for it to be something of progress and to be achieved. So very thought provoking. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
Super thought provoking. All right, Paige, I'm pumped, eager, and ready to uncover your story. Shall we dive in?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. First question, my friend. Give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. How would it read?
I love this question. I think it would read Growing a Garden from a Graveyard.
Say it again, please.
Growing a Garden from a Graveyard.
Growing a garden from a graveyard. Paige, please touch on what this means for you. You've got my attention.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think about what I've experienced myself and I'm sure other people as well, like, and I'm speaking just generally from like a place of experiencing a trauma and not necessarily overcoming that trauma, but what it looks like to move through it. So yes, while one progresses through it and kind of heals and learns lessons, it's not so much that we always come out the other side completely unscathed or unharmed. That's why I liked this metaphor of a garden, because while gardens are beautiful, they still require some maintenance and some upkeep. And so to me, it was more like, well, I don't have control over what's happened to me, but I'm going to be able to control how I respond, move on, and progress. And so I want to take what I've learned from my trauma and put it into something good and take those lessons with me through life and create essentially this garden that is going to always require a little bit of, I think, like I already said, like maintenance, upkeep. Seasons change, produce changes. So, and sometimes a plant dies and you have to regrow it or replant it. So I think that's kind of where that stemmed from.
Wow, it is so meaningful on so many levels. It's a really beautiful metaphor, that parallel of growing a garden from a graveyard.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Wow. Well, without further ado, tell us what your untold story is all about. Let's unravel this.
Yeah. So where do I begin? So it'll almost be 9 years ago. It'll be 9 years actually this May 25th.
Wow.
I was 17 years old. It was the weekend following my prom when I found my mom dead in my childhood home in her bed.
Mm-hmm.
I remember it was a very chaotic morning. There was a lot going on. And the interesting thing with trauma is that you remember every detail of it.
Right. It's so vivid.
It's so vivid. Yeah, it's so vivid. It's like almost like a movie that plays in your head that you wish you could stop, but you can't quite do that. So yeah, I found her dead when I was 17. It was such a transitional time for me. I was just getting ready to, like I said, it was the weekend of my prom, so almost grade 12 graduation. I was trying to consider what universities I wanted to go to or where I was going to accept. Eventually, I ended up going right into university. There are some things about that I think about, and I wonder maybe I should have taken some time, but I didn't. And it happened the way it was intended to happen. So from there, I experienced I guess I went to a pretty dark place following her death. And not so much because I fully understood what was like the gravity of the situation, because no one really prepares you for grief and sudden death.
Right.
And being 17, not really fully understanding that. So the first year after she died, I almost tried to ignore it in a way. Not that it's something that you can ignore completely, but I did try to kind of shut it out and act as though, not that it hadn't happened, but it hadn't impacted me.
Right.
And it wasn't till probably about like a year and a half later, that I really started to notice some changes in myself. And I was like, this doesn't feel like who I am. I was like, I think I might be struggling. In all honesty, like I think I might be struggling with mental health.
It sounds like it was a very foreign experience that you were having. Like this all feels funny and weird and awkward and doesn't feel like myself. Like it doesn't feel like you could identify with yourself anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I would say like it was very foreign, because I think at that time there was parts of me that were struggling with different mental health, like anxiety, and I think I kind of struggled with that my whole life. But there were other things that started to come to the forefront, like nightmares and more like physiological changes to my body, that I was like, this is strange and I don't really know why this is happening.
Right.
And at the time too, I didn't perceive my mom's death as something that could be considered trauma or traumatic. To me, it was just like, well, people die and that happens, and you just kind of have to learn to cope and manage it. But I didn't really understand how intense the situation really was because of the circumstances.
Right.
So I think that really impacted me in a way that I didn't at the time understand it could.
Right.
And so that was kind of a whole journey within itself.
Right. Yeah.
The mental health piece. But I think too, with that, while I kind of progressed through my own journey of mental health and wellness and illness and all of those things, I started to reflect a lot on what I wanted to do with my experiences and what I've learned throughout them.
Right. I'm curious about a couple of things, if it's okay for me to.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And anything that doesn't feel right to talk about or answer, feel free to say, I don't want to go there. That's okay.
Yeah.
But I am curious. So you mentioned it, you were not prepared for the grief and the sudden death. And if it's okay to ask, what happened to your mom? Like it is so sudden, meaning that she wasn't ill or there wasn't anything going on that would have ever gotten you to expect that?
Yeah. So some context. When I was in 8th grade and 11th grade, my mom had cancer twice. So her immune system and her body had taken quite a toll over the years from chemo and different radiation treatment. At the time, she was in remission. She was cancer free, but she had always struggled with very severe asthma. The week leading up, she was like really struggling with her breathing, and she said it felt a little bit weird, but she wasn't too concerned. You know how like sometimes moms can be like, they just want to put up that like really strong front. She was definitely one of those people. She had essentially an asthma attack in her sleep. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we were all sleeping. My sister did receive a text message from my mom. I think it was around 1 a.m. saying like something doesn't feel right. I think I need help. And unfortunately, my sister was asleep. My mom didn't text me, and that's essentially what happened. And that was like a really to find out that she had texted my sister that, and also to know that I was awake at that time. So I think they said that she died around 1:30 a.m. and I was awake in my room. So that was like a really another layer of difficulty to come to terms with.
You were awake and you had no idea that your mom was struggling in the next room.
Yeah.
Right. That must have been so difficult for you to process or come to terms with that.
Yeah. It was the fuel to my survivor's guilt, that's for sure, because I thought about all of the what ifs. I was a very big mommy's girl growing up. So I sometimes, even at the age of 17, we would lay in bed together and watch movies. And typically I would go upstairs because her room was upstairs. And we'd lay in bed with each other and kind of watch a movie and just kind of chill out. And I hadn't done it that night because I was upset about such a teenager thing about a boy. And so I didn't go upstairs and I went right to bed. And so to know that and to know I was awake, it's really fueled that survivor's guilt that you often already get when somebody dies. Because I did ruminate a lot on, well, what if I would have just gone upstairs?
Right. You did take it upon yourself to blame yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it definitely took some healing to really realize that there wasn't anything I could have done differently.
Right.
And that the outcome always would have been the same.
Right. And it must have taken a lot of work for you to come to that point of acceptance and really being able to come up with these reframes. It makes me think like how you had all these multi journeys to go through, being there, witnessing her being dead, that you found her dead.
Yeah.
To learn that it happened in the middle of the night and you were home and awake, that survivor's guilt. You spoke about being the fuel for where that guilt took you. And then, I think about what you mentioned about your sister and her position in all of this. So she's the one who received the text message. She must have been sleeping, right?
Yeah.
So she might not have got it in time. And so it gets me to think about how her experience might have been thinking like her survivor's guilt is about, gosh, why didn't I wake up? How come I didn't hear the message? If I was just awake, if I just was nearby, if she just told me a little bit sooner, if she would have just told me how much she was struggling.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'm sure there were all those what if questions going on for her too. And so it sounds like when I think about your story and what you've shared and where my thoughts go, you both had these like internal journeys where you took a hit with survivor's guilt. And then there's the journey of losing your mom.
Yeah.
Losing your mom at age 17 when there were so many things happening, completely unexpected. What was your support system like?
So at the time, I had a pretty incredible support system in terms of like my friend group. I remember the day of, there was like a couple of girls that I called immediately. They were at my house in less than 10 minutes to support me. They took me out for the day and kind of helped me get my mind off of things. And as they like removed the body, I wasn't present. But no, I had a pretty incredible support system in terms of my friends, absolutely, and family friends. And even when I went to university, the people that I met there also were really understanding when I was comfortable sharing with them that my mom had died. They were incredibly understanding and supportive because we were all kind of in the same boat. We were all living in residence. It was all new. It was a really transformational and transitional time for all of us. They were all pretty incredible. So my support system was pretty top tier.
Yeah, it sounds like a really top tier system. It does. That's really incredible to hear because not everyone has a solid support system, but I really like how you framed it as top tier. That says so much about how you were received and how you were treated and how people looked out for you.
Yeah.
What was the funeral like for you?
So actually, before my mom had died, she had kind of given my sister and I a general idea of like what she would be looking for in terms of services. And she really didn't want anything. She didn't want a viewing. She didn't want a funeral. She just wanted like a burial with, I come from a really small family. So just with a couple of the people that are part of our small little circle. But because it was so sudden, we felt that at least a viewing was needed. I'm from a pretty small town, and I would say that my mom was relatively known in the community. So her death not only shook our lives, it did shake the community's lives as well. So we thought that there were going to be people in the community, her friends and our friends, who wanted an opportunity to have that closure and say their goodbyes. So we did a viewing and no funeral, but it was, for me, it still seemed so surreal, like it wasn't really happening. I felt pretty numb. The only time I really cried during the viewing was when my dad hugged me because he was crying. And that made me pretty emotional, like, oh, this did happen and this is going to hurt people. And that was really hard for me to see, was the other people who were affected by it, because there were other people there who were crying. It spoke to like the type of person that my mom was and the impact that she had on people. And I think that's what really made me more emotional than actually what had happened.
Just taking it all in and seeing how this woman made such an impact on people.
Yeah.
She's left her mark. It felt like that.
Yeah. Yeah. She definitely left her mark.
And so where was your dad when all of this happened initially?
So my parents actually split up when I was in, I think, 4th grade.
Okay.
Yeah. So he's like remarried since, and he like obviously wasn't living with us. And at the time, didn't have like any animosity towards my dad, but we didn't have the strongest relationship.
Right.
But I will say that my mom's death brought us a lot closer. So there's some silver linings within that. And I am grateful for that. But at the time, he wasn't super present, but he did, I would say that he did step up after she died.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to have friends and family friends be supportive and be there for you. And it sounds like you and your sister have a close bond living together and all those pieces. But I guess what I'm curious about is, did it really give you a different sense of comfort and peace to know that your father was showing that kind of support?
I think so. I think what I found most comforting was how, I don't know if this sounds bad, but how it impacted him. It reminded me that he did have a lot of love and care for my mom. And despite their discrepancies and their disagreements, ultimately he did really love her. And I found a lot of comfort in knowing that my mom was so loved, how willing he was to step up and be a support for me, knowing that my mom was kind of my world. She was my focal point for a lot of things. And so it was nice having him step up, especially during such a transitional time.
Yeah. And I'm sure when you could see him in that vulnerability, it also might have brought you to this place of trusting him more with the process.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right. And so tell me a little bit more about, you went through all of this challenging times just after prom, before your high school graduation. You were going to select a university. Yes, you did end up going to university, but what are some other things that you were affected by? What else did you experience?
Yeah. So I think I touched on it very, very briefly about not really understanding like the gravity of the circumstance and situation that I was in and how traumatic it actually was. And so when I was starting to kind of realize and recognize things about myself that hadn't been there before, whether it was anxiety or really, really deep sadness, I also noticed physiological changes like elevated heart rate, and I was a little bit more alert than I typically was. And I was like, this is strange. And I started to experience nightmares and different things. And I was like, something doesn't feel right. And ultimately, it led me to seeking help. And within that journey, I was diagnosed with PTSD. And that within itself came as a shock to me, because not a lot of people talk about the various forms of trauma and what traumatic events can lead up to a diagnosis like PTSD, or the reactions and symptoms that you experience when you experience a trauma. There's a lack of knowledge and education that is provided regarding what kind of traumatic events can lead up to something like this, like PTSD. And I think that was very jarring for me, trying to acknowledge that, oh, I have PTSD, and then also feeling comfortable enough to share that with other people without that fear of judgment. Because people question, like, oh, how could you have PTSD? You're not, for example, a war veteran, because that there's a lot of connection between PTSD and veterans. And
Right.
so I experienced a lot of, I was very nervous.
Did it feel like judgment?
Yeah,
Were you anticipating the judgment or did you actually experience the judgment?
that's a really good question, because you know what, now that you frame it that way, I think it was more of an anticipation. Like I was
Mm.
so concerned that I would be judged, because in a way I was almost judging myself. Like, there's no way that you could be experiencing that because you haven't experienced a trauma, but I did. And I think part of the process was coming to terms with the fact that what you experienced was traumatic,
Mm-hmm.
and that trauma not only impacts everybody differently, but the same traumas can impact people differently.
Of course. Right.
That was like a learning curve for me, because I was like, this doesn't make sense. I also was still so young. So there was a lot of layers to it when it came to that diagnosis specifically, because I just didn't think that that could be a thing that I could be experiencing.
Right. The whole thing was so unexpected, and there was just so many new layers that you were learning and uncovering the entire process, even in being survival mode. And then you said something interesting a couple moments ago. You mentioned about like in your peer group, like with your age bracket at the time, it's not something that people in your age bracket would have known about, or that it was familiar for people. So while you might have been feeling judged, people might have just been asking questions, blatant questions, just out of not knowing.
Yeah, out of curiosity.
Right. Just out of curiosity, but it might come across very questiony, right? Like, just
Yeah,
like, well, what does
yeah,
that mean? Or why would you have that? Or isn't that for like the military? Like, when were you in the military?
right.
And it might just be thinking out loud and asking things out loud, but not really knowing. And I'm wondering if that's what you were experiencing as well, which might have led you to feel like you were being judged.
Yeah, I definitely think anybody who ever inquired about it, they were coming from a place of curiosity.
They just don't know better.
Yeah, we were so young, and
Hmm.
it was shocking, like I said, not only to me, but a lot of my friends too, because she made such an impact in their lives as well. So it could have been traumatic for them as well. Like, so maybe they were trying to have a better understanding of why they might have been feeling the way that they were feeling.
Right. Even just hearing about it, right? Like the vicarious trauma that a person can experience just from learning about someone's pain and trauma.
And seeing me in pain too.
Yes, they were witnessing you firsthand,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Hmm. Wow, and that's a big piece. And so then you had this journey through learning more about how you were truly affected, what the impacts were, and just learning to sort and sift through all of this newness of mental well-being and how to become well and what to address and when to address it. So it sounds like there were a lot of multi layers that you were peeling one at a time, and at a time where you didn't have your mom to help you and be by your side. And I'm wondering, I mean, of course, no one replaces your mom ever, but did you find that there was someone, like you had a solid top tier support system, but who ended up being your go-to person? Like, did you feel like it was safe enough to go to your sister, or did you feel like it needed to be like a third party, like someone completely different, when you just really needed to talk openly, or know that that one person can be there no matter what?
Yeah. There was a lot of layers to my sister and I's relationship, actually, because we didn't really get along all that well before my mom died. And I think
Hmm.
her death kind of brought us together, but she wasn't necessarily my go to
Hmm.
confide in regarding the situation. I think just because we both were going through it. And I know
Right.
for some people, you might want to gravitate towards somebody who might understand, but
But sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's just, it makes it more difficult because you're both stuck in your own pain. So she might have been
exactly,
dwelling about the things that she experienced, and she couldn't probably see it from any other angle too, right? And
exactly.
vice versa for yourself.
Yeah. And I just wanted to also give her the opportunity to heal herself. She had a
Yes.
son and a partner, like she was starting a family. So she had kind of that to all deal with
Right.
at the same time.
Right.
As much as we were there for each other, she wasn't necessarily like my go-to person.
Right.
And now we have an incredible relationship, and we go to each other for many things.
But along that journey before you got to where you are now, not to say that there was someone to replace your mom, but was there like a mom like figure or like a go-to person that wasn't necessarily a peer group member where you would have to explain yourself first to get the support, like someone who just got it? Was there anyone like that?
So probably my best friend, Kennedy, she actually wasn't even we were friends and we didn't become like super close until first year university, and we lived in dorms together.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since that first year of university, she has been an absolute rock for me.
Mm-hmm.
We lived together for like 8 years throughout university, following university, and she's always been and will always be, honestly, my go-to. Always a judgment-free space with her, always willing to give me a space when I need it to talk or just vent or truly anything. And alongside her, her parents have also been incredible. They've almost been like a mom and dad figure for me too. So I'm just so grateful for that whole family.
That's lovely.
Yeah, they've been incredible.
So it's like an entire family taking you under their wing for as much or as little as you needed them whenever it is that you needed them.
Yeah, no, that's truly what it felt like.
That's so lovely. That's really nice that you had that.
Yeah.
I feel relieved knowing that you had that as a part of your journey in discovering yourself and discovering grief and discovering the impact of grief. It's quite telling, all of the work that you've been up to. So, Paige, when people come to see me for therapy, individuals, they typically are in one of three places when they see me. Some people are getting started where they're just at the beginning of their journey, trying to figure out what they even need to talk about, what are all the things that they need to like draw from or bring in to the surface. Some people are in the middle, so they're in the thick of things. Maybe there's an acute stressor and it's triggering older issues that maybe were unfinished business. Or some people are looking back where they want to move forward in life. They're taking that next step forward in their own growth, but they're looking to get some closure, take some meaning, do some reframing in life. Where would you say you are in your journey? If you could pick one spot, would you say that you're just getting started, in the middle, or looking back?
That is another good question. if if I had to pick one,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that I do feel like I am at a point where I am looking back.
Mm-hmm.
However, I say that I'm still pretty convinced that I kind of jump around between all three, just because some things happen now that might be triggering and they bring up memories or they bring up feelings, or I might go through something else and then for some reason that just kind of creates a snowball effect and I feel like I'm back at square one. But ultimately, I do think that I've done a lot of healing and I've put a lot of my energy and I've taken a lot of the lessons that I've learned throughout this, and I've tried my best to not only put it into my personal journey but also into helping others. So I would say that I am at a point where I am looking back because I'm always reflecting on what I experienced and what I've learned throughout it. But there's definitely still moments where I'm kind of in the middle of it. I might feel like I'm back at the beginning and I need to start over.
I think that's just working your process, but it sounds
Yeah.
like you're towards the nearing of that part of the cycle, but every once in a while you might bounce around. But it sounds like you always find yourself back looking back.
Yes, I think that's pretty spot on.
Yeah. And that's part of the healing journey. It's not linear.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm. Is there anything that you want to remember about the process of your healing journey? If there was something that you needed to remember or remind yourself of, what would that be?
There was a moment, and it actually wasn't too long ago, that I came across this saying, and it's "You're always on time for your own life." And there was a period of time during my journey where I felt so behind and I felt so stuck. I know with trauma, sometimes you can get stuck in that place where it occurred. And so there were periods of time where I was like, I feel like I'm still stuck in my 17-year-old self and I'm not progressing, even though everybody else around me is evolving and they're changing and I feel very stuck. So when I heard this saying, like, you're always on time for your own life, it really stuck with me and continues to stick with me. And I tell everybody it now because I think it's very easy to get caught up in this idea that in these expectations that you're supposed to be somewhere by a certain age or by a certain time. And I was very caught up in that for a really long time, especially during my journey when I felt so stuck.
And it's interesting that you say, the reminder was you're always on time for your own life. And so that stuck with you to get you unstuck.
Yes.
The irony of that.
Yes.
So, Paige, we've talked about many different facets of your story and different parts of your experiences and all the multi layers. And you have started to touch on your mental health and how your mental health was affected. If you feel comfortable, it would be really great for us to talk a little bit more about the details of how your mental health was affected with what you had gone through at the time. You've shared that, you grew up with anxiety, knowing that you had an anxious personality. You learned over time that you had post traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, like you weren't aware of it initially, not even recognizing you had experienced a trauma, not even understanding, well, what does it mean to grieve, right? And
Yeah.
learning to uncover all of that. Were there any like competing inner thoughts that you experienced that you weren't sharing with anyone, or any particular confusing emotions that you recall having back then, or other ways your mental health had taken a toll?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, when you first asked that, like, is there anything that you were kind of holding back from sharing with other people? And I think it was really that piece of, before this happened, my life, I would say that I was very fortunate. I would say that my life was very good and I didn't have much, if anything, to complain about. And so after this happened and I was struggling with my mental health and I was trying to really figure out what it all meant and what I was supposed to be doing and how I was supposed to be healing, I felt almost guilty for feeling the way that I was feeling, because what did I have to complain about? Because apart from this happening, my life was really good.
Mm-hmm.
And those thoughts of, well, somebody could have it worse than me, so
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't be feeling this way. Apart from the survivor's guilt, there was just personal guilt for feeling the way that I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And now I acknowledge that. I think I've mentioned it already, that we all can experience traumas and we might experience similar traumas, but respond to them differently. And I wish I understood that at the time,
Right.
because then I could have told myself that just because somebody might have it worse doesn't mean that it's not really terrible for you right now, and that it's okay to feel the way that you're feeling.
Right.
I felt almost like ashamed,
Mm-hmm.
outside of feeling guilty, that I was feeling the way that I was feeling, or I would have bad days, or I would feel emotional. And so that was a really interesting thing to kind of work through, being comfortable with feeling bad and not being ashamed and not feeling ashamed for it.
Right. And when you talk about the emotions of guilt and shame, it's interesting that you started to talk about how you felt guilty, but then there were moments where you felt ashamed. So, emotions 101.
Yeah.
Guilt is something we experience. I learned this from somewhere. This is not my own ideas. Guilt is something that you experience, and it feels like I did this thing wrong, or I made a mistake, or something went wrong. And there's this idea that you can rectify it, correct it, and move on.
Right.
But if you somehow end up in the place of guilt for too long, it can develop into shame, which is no longer I did something wrong or I made a mistake, or it goes into I am wrong. I am the mistake.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you were doing a dance between these two, back and forth.
I feel like this might be the first time that I've heard it described this way. That's definitely what I was doing. I definitely bounced around between feeling like I did something wrong, I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah, like you're saying, my life is good. So what am I
Yes.
complaining about? That's the guilt, right? Like, what do I have to complain about? I should just fix it and not complain,
Yes.
even though that was so jaded. That's how it translated for you. That's how it got conditioned. Like, I have a great life. I had a wonderful life. Okay, so death happened. It's a thing. It's part of life experience. It's
Yep.
unfortunate that it happened. So, what do I have to complain about? But then there was probably the parts of you that really started to feel
Yeah.
things badly. Then you probably didn't know what to do with that guilt. So it became like,
Exactly.
I am a problem. I am the
Yes.
problem. And I don't know how to do this. How come I don't know how to do this? I'm a problem. But that's why I was thinking, like, maybe you were doing a dance going back and forth
Yeah.
between guilt and shame.
You mentioned something that really stuck out to me, the piece of like, I don't know what I'm doing. And that sticks with me because as somebody who is an academic and who is logical at most times,
Right.
I need answers, just how my brain works. When I don't have those answers, or I feel like I'm not doing the right thing, or I'm not doing the correct thing, it does feel shameful. It feels like there is something wrong with me.
Yeah, and probably an element of control or lacking control,
Yes.
right? So if there were moments where you didn't feel you had control, then the guilt might have hung out with you and that might have seeped into shame. And then that cycle would have happened. But when you had control, it felt better and more manageable. So maybe it was just guilt and you found a way to navigate in some way. So it's interesting to see how all of that connects.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me, what is your key message to the listeners of our show? What do you want them to know?
I want them to know that it's so imperative to listen to your body and your mind and your heart when something happens to you, or even if nothing's happened to you, but you start to feel differently. You start to notice things about yourself that feel different or are different. That there's no shame in asking questions or seeking that help to find some answers.
Mm-hmm.
I think I felt ashamed to have to seek help at first, but I started to recognize that the only way that I could heal and progress is if I did get that help. And the second piece to that is through your healing and your progression, you're going to learn a lot of things. And I hope that you can take those lessons and those silver linings from the tragedy that you might face and the difficult things you might face and come out the other side and be able to use them to your advantage. I think there's a lot to be learned when you experience something terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Acknowledging that it's terrible is totally okay, but also acknowledging that, okay, so what has this taught me and what can I take from it and where can I grow from that? It kind of relates back to the garden and the graveyard.
Right.
I took a lot from what I experienced and
Mm-hmm.
I've changed so much since I was 17. I mean, as most of us do, but it feels like a complete 180. Like I am a different person and my values are different and everything is so different. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I guess just listen to yourself, trust yourself, take what you can from the tragedies that you face, but also acknowledge that it's okay to feel badly too in those moments.
Exactly. Right. Just honor yourself for where you are and feel the things that you're feeling and permission to be.
Exactly.
The whole message has been beautiful. But even with the way you started by saying, listen to your body and your mind and your heart, like all of them,
Yes.
your whole self, and don't shame yourself in the process. Be curious about it, recognize it, and just take one step forward. And as you heal, see what else you can find. What's the opportunity there? So tell me, I know you shared about one thing that helps to keep you in check and as a daily reminder, but is there anything at the time that was really inspirational for you that really helped you pivot in your untold story? Was there like an inspirational quote or book or speaker or event or person or place?
Yeah, actually, it's a quote, but it's also a bit of a short little poem. I was very into poetry at the time of my healing process, and it's create the love you want and give it to yourself.
Hmm. Say it one more time.
Create the love you want and give it to yourself.
Oh, so powerful.
Yeah, that helps me with those feelings of shame and guilt and realizing that, well, everything is so transitional and nothing can be really for certain and a lot of things are very temporary. One thing that is pretty consistent is the love that I can give myself and the love that I know that I deserve. And I think that helps me grow throughout my journey.
Hmm.
So that's definitely stuck with me as well.
Yeah, I see that. It's absolutely incredible to see where your inspiration has come from and to hear details about what has contributed to your pivoting and the spark in your healing.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. It really is fantastic. Okay, so then tell us, what is a cause or an organization that you would like to give a shout out to?
Yeah. So this organization, it's not really relevant to my story, but it is very, very near and dear to my heart and
Hmm.
the work that I do. It's called Project Hope London.
Hmm.
Essentially, they provide outreach services to folks experiencing homelessness, those that are sleeping rough and sleeping on the streets. We provide
Hmm.
basic needs like food, water, clothing, toiletries, different things like that on a weekly basis. We go out in the community and meet them where they're at in a couple different locations.
Amazing. Well, then let's give a shout out to Project Hope London.
Yes.
That's fantastic. Okay. Okay. So how can people connect with you if they would like to? Where are you findable?
I would say my main two places that you can find me would be Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
and that's at Paige Alexandra, but there's two A's in Paige and two A's in Alexandra. And then also LinkedIn under Paige Logan.
We have your information. It's all on your show notes page.
Yeah.
People could just click on your page and do that. So that's perfect.
Awesome.
Amazing. Paige, guess what?
We did it.
We did it. You just dared yourself to share. Congratulations. You are a rock star. This is so fantastic. You know, Paige, I just want to take a moment to express my gratitude for what you have just shared today, the kind of pain that you described you experienced and what you had to go through from that age of 17 when there was so much that you had to endure and so many changes and so many curveballs that you were not expecting and in a time where there were already so many moving parts in your life. I don't even know what it would have been like being in your shoes, walking your path, but that you brought your entire experience, all your feels, and you shared openly with such great vulnerability. It's very inspiring to be able to hear your story. And this is an important story that you've shared. And I know it's going to inspire other people and bring courage and hope to perhaps those who might have suffered a deep loss or witnessed something, or your story will resonate in many ways, I know. So I'm just truly grateful to have been able to hear and witness your story myself today. So thank you for the deep conversation and for all your daring and sharing.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure. And once again, Paige, thank you for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.